Why? The avoidant struggles more after a breakup than the anxious does. Breakups shake us to our core. They rip open wounds we didn't even know we had. And while we often think the anxious one, the one who craves closeness, will suffer the most, the truth is it's the avoidant who struggles longer and harder. Why? Because pain doesn't hit them all at once. It sneaks up on them. It lingers. And it stays. See, when a relationship ends, the anxious person feels everything immediately. They crash, they hurt. But that pain is like a tidal wave. It comes fast, it peaks, and then eventually it passes. But the avoidant? They run. They distract themselves. They tell themselves they're better off, and for a while they believe it. They push the pain away until one day it hits them like a train. Avoidants are experts at pushing emotions away. From an early age, they learned that vulnerability felt unsafe. Maybe they had caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, or maybe they were praised for being independent while their emotional needs were ignored. Over time, they built a pattern. When emotions get too intense, they shut down. They suppress instead of process. When a breakup happens, the avoidant doesn't experience the immediate emotional crash that an anxious person does. Instead, they intellectualize. They tell themselves it wasn't the right relationship. They focus on logic rather than feelings. They distract themselves with work, hobbies, or casual encounters. To the outside world, it looks like they're handling it well. They seem composed, even unaffected. But that's just the surface. What's really happening is that their nervous system is in survival mode. Their subconscious is doing everything it can to avoid emotional discomfort. But here's the problem. Emotions don't disappear just because they're ignored. When someone suppresses emotions, they don't get processed properly. Instead, they get stored in the body, waiting for an opportunity to surface. It might take weeks, months, or even years, but eventually the emotions they push down will demand to be felt. It often happens at unexpected moments. A song, a scent, or a familiar place can trigger a flood of feelings they thought they had escaped. The very thing they were trying to avoid comes back even stronger. Suppression doesn't eliminate emotions, it only postpones them. Avoidants tell themselves a story that reinforces their suppression. They believe they're strong because they don't get overly emotional. They think they're rational for moving on quickly. But strength isn't the absence of emotion. True strength comes from facing what's inside. The belief that pushing emotions away as a form of control is an illusion. In reality, it's the emotions that end up controlling them. The more they suppress, the more those emotions dictate their behavior in subtle ways. One of the ways suppression manifests is through delayed grief. Unlike the anxious person who mourns immediately, the avoidant doesn't feel the full weight of the loss right away. They continue with their daily routine, seemingly unaffected, until one day they find themselves feeling inexplicably empty. The distraction techniques that worked before, keeping busy, focusing on personal projects, start losing their effectiveness. They may even start experiencing symptoms of depression, not realizing that these emotions have been building up beneath the surface all along. Another consequence of suppression is difficulty forming deep connections in the future. Because they haven't properly processed the pain of the past, they carry unresolved emotions into new relationships. They might avoid intimacy, fearing a repeat of the past. They might attract emotionally unavailable partners because deep down they're still emotionally unavailable themselves. They don't trust love fully because they haven't fully faced the pain of losing it. Suppression also leads to an internal disconnection. Many avoidants struggle with identifying their emotions because they've spent so long ignoring them. When asked how they feel, they often say they don't know. This isn't because they don't have emotions. It's because they've trained themselves not to feel them. They've conditioned themselves to prioritize logic over emotion, making it difficult to access the very feelings that could help them heal. This disconnection from emotions also impacts decision-making. Without emotional awareness, they struggle to recognize what they truly want. They might find themselves in relationships that feel logical rather than fulfilling. They might chase goals that seem impressive on paper but leave them feeling empty inside. Without processing emotions, they become detached from their own desires, leading to a life that looks successful on the outside but feels unfulfilling on the inside. Over time, suppressed emotions can even manifest physically. The mind and body are deeply connected, and when emotions aren't processed, they often show up in the body as stress, tension, fatigue, or even illness. Many avoidants experience chronic stress without realizing it's tied to unresolved emotional pain. They believe they're fine because they don't feel outward distress, yet their body carries the weight of everything they haven't allowed themselves to process. One of the hardest parts for an avoidant after a breakup is that they don't understand why they're still affected long after they thought they had moved on. They might see their ex thriving while they find themselves struggling with unexplained sadness months later. This happens because emotional processing has a timeline of its own. The emotions don't disappear when the relationship ends. They simply wait for a moment when the avoidant is less distracted, less busy, and more vulnerable. When that moment arrives, all the emotions they suppressed come rushing back, often at a time when they least expect expected. Because they struggle to connect with their emotions, they also struggle to express them. This makes it difficult to seek support. While an anxious person might reach out to friends, journal, or seek therapy immediately after a breakup, an avoidant often keeps everything inside. They might believe no one will understand them, or that they should be able to handle it alone. This isolation only prolongs the healing process. The emotions that need to be released stay trapped, making it even harder to move forward. What makes suppression particularly dangerous is that it creates a cycle. When the emotions finally surface, they feel overwhelming. The avoidant doesn't know how to deal with them, so they suppress again. This creates an emotional backlog, unresolved pain from multiple past experiences that keeps piling up. Over time, this leads to emotional numbness, where even positive emotions feel muted. They struggle to experience deep joy because suppressing pain also suppresses pleasure. Breaking this cycle requires awareness. It requires a shift from avoidance to acceptance, from suppression to expression. It means recognizing that emotions are not a weakness but a signal, a guide toward healing. The only way out is through, and the only way to truly move on is to allow themselves to feel. Avoidants often believe they are self-sufficient, that they don't need anyone, and that they are better off alone. They pride themselves on their independence, on their ability to function without relying on others for emotional support. Throughout the relationship, they may have kept an emotional distance, avoiding deep vulnerability, convinced that too much closeness would suffocate them. They may have even told themselves that if the relationship ended, they would be fine because they never fully depended on their partner in the first place. But what they don't realize is that despite their best efforts to remain detached, their partner became a source of emotional safety. Even if they resisted intimacy, the presence of another person in their life created a sense of security. They may not have openly expressed their feelings, but they knew their partner was there. The consistent presence of someone who cared, who listened, who wanted to connect, offered them a stability they rarely acknowledged. Over time, this presence became woven into their daily life in ways they didn't fully appreciate. A text message in the morning, a call at night, someone who noticed when they were acting distant, someone who asked how their day was even when they brushed off the question. Because avoidants don't like to dwell on emotions, they often don't realize how much these small interactions mattered. They didn't think they needed them, but once they disappear, the absence is felt in a way that catches them off guard. They might go about their routine as usual, believing they have successfully moved on, but then something shifts. They wake up one morning and reach for their phone, expecting a message that isn't there. They come home to silence, and for the first time, they notice how empty the space feels. The absence of their partner is no longer just a thought, it's an undeniable reality. At first, they try to rationalize it away. They tell themselves they always enjoyed being alone. They convince themselves they don't need anyone. But the truth is, whether they acknowledged it or not, their partner provided an emotional anchor. It wasn't about dependency, it was about connection. And when that connection is suddenly severed, it creates a void they don't know how to fill. What makes this realization even more difficult is that it comes late. Anxious individuals feel the loss immediately, but avoidants delay it. In the beginning, they feel relief. They think they've dodged emotional pain because they don't feel an immediate crash. They go out with friends, focus on work, or distract themselves with new experiences. But all of these distractions only serve to postpone the inevitable. Sooner or later, they are forced to confront the fact that something is missing. The loss of an emotional safe space is not just about the absence of a person. It's about the absence of comfort, familiarity, and the ability to be seen, even in small ways. Their partner may have been the only person who truly understood them, even when they were distant. Someone who knew when they needed space, but still cared enough to stay. Someone who made an effort to break through their walls. And now that person is gone. As this reality sets in, they may struggle to understand why they feel so unsettled. They may not recognize the deep sense of loss creeping into their lives. Instead, they might feel restless, irritable, or unusually disconnected. They may lose interest in things they once enjoyed, not realizing that their lack of enthusiasm is tied to the absence of emotional support they once received. They may throw themselves into work, exercise, or social activities, trying to convince themselves that everything is fine, but no matter how much they try to ignore it, the emptiness remains. In some cases, avoidants will attempt to fill this void with another person, not because they are ready for a new connection, but because they are trying to replace the emotional comfort they lost. They may enter a new relationship quickly, believing that if they just find someone else, the pain will go away. But since they haven't processed the loss, these relationships often feel hollow. They find themselves unable to connect on the same level, and no matter how much they try, something always feels off. This loss of an emotional safe space also affects their ability to open up in the future. Because they never fully process the impact of losing their partner, they carry unresolved emotions into their next relationships. They may be even more hesitant to trust, even more resistant to vulnerability. They may find themselves pushing people away more aggressively, fearing that if they let someone in again, they will experience the same pain. Instead of learning from the loss, they build higher walls, convincing themselves that emotional detachment is the only way to avoid getting hurt again. The irony is that the very thing they tried to prevent, feeling vulnerable, feeling dependent on another person, ends up being what hurts them the most in the long run. By denying their need for connection, they set themselves up for deeper loneliness. By suppressing their emotions, they prolong their suffering. By resisting intimacy, they create a cycle where they repeatedly lose the very thing they secretly crave. At first, the avoidant enjoys the silence. The space feels like freedom. The absence of their partner like a weight lifted. They believe they have escaped the emotional turbulence of the breakup, that they are finally in control again. Unlike the anxious person who immediately feels the void, the avoidant moves forward as if nothing happened. They fill their days with work, hobbies, or social events, convincing themselves they are fine. They tell themselves they always preferred solitude, that they never truly needed their partner in the first place. For a while, it even feels true. But as time passes, something shifts. The distractions lose their effectiveness. The activities that once kept them busy begin to feel empty. The silence that once felt like peace starts to feel oppressive. At first, it's subtle. A quiet night at home feels a little too quiet. A weekend without plans stretches on longer than it used to. The absence of their partner is no longer just a thought. It starts to manifest in their surroundings. The bed feels bigger. The air feels heavier. The lack of texts, calls, or simple moments of connection becomes more noticeable. They may continue to tell themselves they are fine, but their body tells a different story. Loneliness creeps in not as an immediate wave, but as a slow, steady presence. It isn't dramatic or overwhelming. It is subtle but persistent. They may find themselves reaching for their phone only to realize there's no message waiting for them. They may go out with friends but feel disconnected from the conversation. They may find themselves replaying old memories, not because they want to, but because their mind keeps drifting back to what once was. Loneliness does not hit avoidance all at once. It seeps in through the crack. It is in the moments they least expect, when they wake up and realize no one is there to say good morning, when they accomplish something and have no one to share it with, when they sit alone in a cafe and notice how many people are engaged in deep conversation. They have spent so much time convincing themselves that they don't need connection, but now, without it, something feels off. They may try to ignore these feelings by diving deeper into distractions. They might take on more work, go out more often, or throw themselves into new projects. But these distractions are just that, temporary fixes. No matter how much they try to avoid it, the feeling of loneliness lingers in the background. It follows them home at night. It sits with them during moments of stillness. It reminds them that for all their independence, something is missing. The realization is slow and often met with resistance. Avoidants are not used to acknowledging their emotional needs, and when loneliness begins to surface, they may dismiss it as boredom or temporary discomfort. They may convince themselves they just need to stay busy, that eventually the feeling will pass. But loneliness is not something that disappears with distraction. It is a reflection of something deeper. The unacknowledged need for connection, the loss of a presence that brought them comfort, even if they refuse to admit it at the time. For many avoidants, this creeping loneliness is confusing. They thought they were fine. They thought they had moved on, but now, months later, they find themselves missing something they thought they never needed. The delayed nature of their loneliness makes it harder to process because they don't understand why they are struggling now when they felt so strong before. The truth is that their emotions were never absent. They were just buried under layers of avoidance. And now that the distractions are wearing thin, the emotions are rising to the surface. This slow burn of loneliness often leads to a sense of restlessness. They may feel the urge to reach out to their ex, not because they necessarily want to rekindle the relationship, but because they miss the familiarity, the comfort, the sense of being known by someone. They may scroll through old messages, revisit places they used to go together, or find themselves thinking about what their ex is doing now. The emotional distance they once valued now feels isolating. The walls they built to protect themselves have become barriers to the very thing they need, connection. Some avoidants will attempt to suppress this loneliness further, doubling down on their independence. They may tell themselves they just need to toughen up, that emotions are a weakness, that they should be able to handle this alone. But deep down, they know that something has changed. The independence they once cherished now feels like isolation. The space they fought to maintain now feels empty. The very thing they thought they wanted, distance, has left them feeling more disconnected than ever. Loneliness, when ignored, only deepens. It does not simply fade away with time. Instead, it embeds itself in everyday life, creating a sense of emptiness that lingers beneath the surface. The avoidant may try to outrun it, but eventually they have to face it. And And when they do, they realize that the connection they once resisted is the very thing they now crave. Avoidants have spent most of their lives believing that emotions can be controlled. They have trained themselves to suppress their feelings, to intellectualize their experiences rather than feel them fully. They convince themselves that they are logical, rational, and independent, that they don't need deep emotional connections to function. When a breakup happens, they rely on this same strategy. They push down the pain, distract themselves with work or activities, and tell themselves that they have moved on. They pride themselves on their ability to remain composed, to not let emotions get the best of them. But emotions are not something that can be permanently suppressed. They do not simply disappear because they are ignored. Instead, they resurface in unexpected ways, often at the worst possible moments. In the immediate aftermath of a breakup, the avoidant might feel relief. They might believe they have successfully sidestepped the emotional turmoil that others go through. While their anxious ex is openly grieving, crying, and seeking support, the avoidant is going about life as usual, but beneath the surface, the emotions they have ignored are building up. Suppression is like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. It requires constant effort, and the deeper it is pushed, the stronger it eventually bursts back up. Weeks or months later, when they least expect it, something triggers the emotions they thought they had avoided. It could be a familiar song, a scent, a place they once visited with their ex. It could be the sight of a happy couple walking down the street, laughing in a way that reminds them of what they lost. In that moment, the emotions they buried resurface with full force, overwhelming them in a way they are not prepared for. Because they never allowed themselves to process their feelings in a healthy way, the emotions hit them harder and last longer than they would have if they had been acknowledged from the start. Unlike an anxious person who faces the pain head on and works through it in real time, the avoidant experiences a delayed and intensified emotional crash. What might have been manageable grief, if processed earlier, now feels insurmountable. They do not have the coping mechanisms to deal with it because they have spent so much time avoiding their emotions rather than learning how to handle them. Instead of being able to process their feelings, they become stuck in them, unsure of how to move forward. One of the biggest challenges they face is their inability to understand why they are struggling so much when they thought they had already moved on. Because they don't connect with their emotions in real time, they don't recognize the gradual accumulation of suppressed pain. When it finally surfaces, they feel blindsided. They might experience mood swings, irritability, or sudden feelings of sadness that seem to come out of nowhere. They might lose motivation or feel a sense of emptiness that they can't explain. As they have spent so long detaching from their emotions, they don't have the emotional vocabulary to articulate what they are feeling. Instead, they feel lost in a storm of emotions that they don't know how to navigate. This emotional crash often leads to regret. In the beginning, the avoidant convinced themselves that the breakup was for the best, that they didn't really need their ex, that they were better off alone. But now, with the full weight of their emotions finally catching up to them, they start questioning their decisions. They wonder if they made a mistake, if they should have tried harder, if they pushed away someone who truly cared for them. The certainty they once had begins to crumble, replaced by doubt and longing. In some cases, this delayed emotional crash leads them to reach out to their ex, not because they have truly processed their feelings, but because they are desperate to alleviate the pain they are now feeling. They seek comfort in familiarity, hoping that reconnecting will give them relief from the overwhelming emotions they are experiencing. But because they have not done the internal work to process their emotions, these attempts at reconnection often come from a place of avoidance rather than genuine healing. Even if they do not reach out, the weight of their emotions lingers. They might retreat further into isolation, believing that if they just wait long enough, the pain will eventually fade. But suppressed emotions do not simply disappear, they demand to be felt. The longer they try to avoid them, the more they interfere with their ability to move forward. The pain lingers not because the breakup was necessarily more painful for them, but because they refused to process it when it first happened. By the time they realize the full extent of their emotions, it often feels too late. Their ex has moved on, their chance at repairing the relationship is past, and they are left alone with feelings they don't know how to handle. They are forced to sit with the pain they tried so hard to escape, learning the hard way that avoidance does not protect them, it only prolongs their suffering. Avoidants are masters of control. They have spent their lives building walls to protect themselves from emotional vulnerability. Carefully managing how much they let people in, they have learned to rely on themselves, to keep their emotions in check and to avoid situations that make them feel exposed. In relationships, this control manifests as emotional distancing, keeping their partner at arm's length, resisting deep discussions, and avoiding situations that make them feel dependent. It gives them a sense of power, a feeling that they are in charge of their own emotional well-being. But after a breakup, that sense of control is shattered in a way they never expected. At first, they may believe they are handling it well. They convince themselves that they saw the breakup coming, that they were prepared for it, that it doesn't affect them the way it would affect someone who is more emotionally invested. They maintain a composed exterior, going about their daily life as if nothing has changed, but underneath the surface, something begins to shift. They start to realize that despite their best efforts, they are not in control of how they feel. No matter how much they try to suppress it, an uncomfortable sense of loss begins to creep in. For an avoidant, this is deeply unsettling. They are not used to being overwhelmed by emotions. They are used to keeping everything in check, maintaining a sense of stability through logic and detachment. But now they find themselves confronted with feelings they don't understand, emotions that don't simply go away because they will them to. They may feel frustrated with themselves, wondering why they can't just move on the way they expected to. They may try to rationalize their emotions, telling themselves that it's just temporary, that they'll be fine soon. But deep down, they know something is different. This loss of control becomes even more apparent when triggers begin to appear. A random memory of their ex, a song that reminds them of the relationship, a place they used to visit together. Suddenly, emotions they thought they had buried come rushing to the surface. They don't know what to do with them. They have spent so much time avoiding emotional depth that now, when emotions demand to be felt, they have no tools to process them. This lack of control over their internal world is unsettling, and they don't know how to handle it. Avoidants often respond to this in one of two ways. Some throw themselves even deeper into distractions, working longer hours, filling their schedule with activities, numbing themselves with entertainment, or even jumping into another relationship just to regain the sense of control they have lost. They believe that if they stay busy enough, the emotions will eventually fade and they can return to their usual detached state. But no matter how much they distract themselves, the emotions remain in the background, waiting to resurface. Others retreat into themselves, becoming even more withdrawn than before. They may isolate themselves from friends and family, avoiding conversations about their feelings because they don't want to admit that they are struggling. They fear being perceived as weak, as someone who is affected by a breakup in a way they never thought they would be. This isolation only deepens their internal struggle because without anyone to talk to, their emotions remain unresolved. In the early stages of a breakup, avoidants often feel a sense of relief. They tell themselves that they have regained their freedom, that they are back in their comfort zone of independence. Unlike their anxious counterpart who may desperately seek reassurance and contact, the avoidant pulls away further, reinforcing their belief that they are better off alone. They may even convince themselves that their ex will struggle without them, that they were the more detached one in the relationship, and that moving on will be effortless. But as time passes, something unexpected happens. They start to notice that their ex is healing, perhaps even thriving. Maybe they see them out with friends, posting happy moments on social media, or starting a new relationship. This is where the avoidant begins to struggle in ways they never anticipated. They assume that distance would make them feel better, that avoidance would protect them from the emotional fallout. But when they realize that their ex has moved on without them, they are hit with a wave of emotions they don't know how to process. The struggle comes from the fact that deep down, avoidants rely on the idea that their ex will continue to hold space for them. Even if they do not consciously admit it, they often expect their ex to still be thinking about them, to still feel the same emotional attachment. Because avoidants take longer to process their own emotions, they assume that their ex is also still in that stage of processing. But when they see that this is not the case, they feel an unexpected loss of control. The dynamic they assumed was in place, the idea that they were the less invested one, is suddenly flipped upside down. This loss of perceived control is deeply unsettling. Avoidants like to believe that they are the ones who dictate the terms of connection and separation. They like to feel that if they ever wanted to reconnect, the door would still be open. But when they realize that their ex has truly moved on, they are confronted with a truth they never prepared for. They are not as detached as they thought. The idea that someone they once had a deep connection with no longer needs or wants them disrupts their carefully maintained belief in their emotional self-sufficiency. At this stage, avoidants often experience an intense internal conflict. On one hand, they have spent their entire lives believing that they do not need deep emotional bonds, that they are fine on their own. On the other hand, they are now experiencing undeniable feelings of loss and regret. They do not understand why their ex's ability to move on affects them so much, and this confusion only adds to their distress. They may find themselves reminiscing about the relationship, idealizing the good moments, and questioning whether they made a mistake in leaving or pushing their partner away. This delayed realization often leads to a sense of longing, but because avoidants struggle with vulnerability, they do not always act on these feelings in a healthy way. Instead of reaching out directly or expressing their emotions, they might engage in passive behaviors, checking their ex's social media, asking mutual friends about them, or even casually reaching out under the pretense of something insignificant. They tell themselves they are just curious, that it doesn't mean anything, but deep down, they are trying to reestablish the sense of control they feel they have lost. If their ex has fully moved on, this creates even more distress. Avoidants do not like to admit that they have emotional needs, and when they realize that they can no longer rely on the silent presence of their ex's attachment, they are forced to confront a painful truth. They are alone in a way they never expected. While they thought they were protecting themselves by maintaining emotional distance, they now see that this distance has only left them stranded with unresolved feelings. What makes this even harder is that avoidants are often resistant to reaching out for closure. Their pride, their fear of vulnerability, and their long-held belief in self-sufficiency prevent them from having the open, honest conversations that might help them process their emotions. Instead, they are left grappling with the what-ifs, replaying moments in their head, and struggling to understand why the breakup is affecting them more than they ever thought it would. Avoidants are experts at compartmentalizing. Throughout their lives, they have learned to separate emotions from their daily reality, pushing difficult feelings into the background rather than confronting them. This ability to suppress emotions allows them to function in a way that appears logical and composed, even in situations that would deeply affect others. In a breakup, this coping mechanism initially seems like a strength. Unlike someone with an anxious attachment style who immediately feels the weight of the separation, the avoidant detaches quickly, believing that time will naturally resolve any lingering emotions. They tell themselves they are fine, that they can move forward without looking back, and that avoiding pain is the best way to deal with it. But the way avoidants process emotions is fundamentally different from others. Instead of feeling and expressing their pain in the moment, they push it down, thinking they are avoiding suffering, when in reality they are only delaying it. In the beginning, this strategy works. They fill their time with work, hobbies, and distractions, convincing themselves they have already moved on. They pride themselves on their ability to stay logical and unaffected, viewing their emotional detachment as proof that they have made the right choice. What makes this even more challenging is that by the time they finally begin to feel the weight of the breakup, their ex has often moved on. This realization forces them to confront the fact that they are alone in their grief, processing emotions on a delayed timeline that does not match the reality of the situation. They may feel regret, wondering if they miscalculated their ability to detach or if they made a mistake in pushing their partner away. But avoidants do not easily admit to regret. Instead of reaching out or expressing their emotions, they try to regain control by suppressing them again, creating a cycle of avoidance that only prolongs their suffering. Unlike someone with an anxious attachment style who processes emotions in real time by talking, crying, and seeking support, avoidants often do the opposite. They internalize everything, believing that emotions are something to be managed privately, not shared. This isolation makes it even harder for them to heal. They might go through months or even years without fully acknowledging the impact of the breakup, only to be caught off guard by emotions that resurface unexpected. One of the biggest challenges avoidants face is their resistance to vulnerability. They have built their identity around being self-sufficient, around not needing emotional support from others, so when they finally experience deep feelings of loss, they struggle with how to process them in a healthy way. They might bury themselves in work, engage in casual relationships to distract themselves, or even convince themselves that they are happier alone. But no matter how much they try to escape it, the unresolved emotions remain. For many, avoidance healing takes much longer than they anticipate. They expect to move on quickly because they believe they are in control of their emotions, but because they never allowed themselves to fully experience the breakup, it lingers in ways they do not understand. They may look back years later and realize that they never truly processed what happened, that they still carry unresolved feelings from a relationship they thought they had long forgotten. This delayed grief is one of the most painful parts of being avoidant. It sneaks up on them when they least expect it, long after they assumed they had healed. The irony is that while avoidants believe they are protecting themselves from emotional pain by avoiding it, they are actually prolonging their suffering. The emotions they suppress do not disappear. They only wait for a moment when the avoidant is no longer able to distract themselves. And when that moment comes, it can feel overwhelming because they lack the tools to cope with emotions they never learned to process. They are left to face a reality they spent so long avoiding, that healing does not come from suppression, but from allowing themselves to truly feel, even if it is uncomfortable. Chuang Ti Di Duan. Chuang Ti Di Duan. And so, the truth becomes clear. The avoidant struggles more after a breakup, not because they feel nothing, but because they have spent their entire lives running from what they truly feel. They believe that detachment is strength, that avoidance is control, that emotions can be suppressed into nothingness. But emotions are not designed to be buried. They are meant to be experienced, processed, and understood. The reason the avoidant struggles longer is not because they are weaker, but because they delay the inevitable. They convince themselves they are fine, but the pain does not disappear. It only waits for a moment when distractions are no longer enough. And when that moment comes, they are often unprepared for the depth of what they truly feel. Healing does not come from avoidance. It comes from acceptance. It comes from facing the discomfort, from allowing oneself to grieve, from understanding that true strength is not in shutting others out, but in having the courage to let them in. The moment an avoidant allows themselves to feel, to process, to connect, not just with others, but with themselves, that is the moment true healing begins. And so whether you relate to this struggle or you know someone who does, the lesson is the same. Running from emotions does not free you from them. Only when you face them do you truly move forward. Thank you for being here today, for opening your mind, and for taking this journey with me. Remember, growth begins the moment we stop avoiding and start embracing. Wishing you all strength, clarity, and the courage to heal. Until next time, take care, and thank you.